speak to us about Christian apologetics.
Yes, that's correct.
So I guess that's where we get apologized for, so
No.
that you can apologize, Christians can apologize for your intolerance and bigoted principles.
No, Larry, you've got it all wrong.
Okay. So what is this apologetic?
Well, why don't I tell you?
Okay.
Why don't I tell you? Someone stand up? All right, good morning, everybody. Good morning, guys. So the topic is apologetics, but I call this feeding your faith, starving your doubt. Because, it's all about belief. We all have our beliefs. It's one thing to believe something. It's another thing to be able to defend it when somebody has questions against that. Which reminds me of a story about a man that was sitting in the back pew of a church, and after the service, the pastor goes up to him. He hadn't recognized him. He goes up and starts chatting with him, and he says, "By the way, just out of curiosity, what is it that you believe?" And he thought about it for a second, and he says, "Well, I believe what the church believes." The pastor goes, Okay. Well, what is it that you think the church believes?" And he thought about it, and he says, "Well, the church believes what I believe." And he goes, "Okay, all right." And he thought about that. He says, "Okay, so what is it that you and the church believe?" And he thought about it, and he says, "Well, we believe the same thing." So that was his answer to that. So sometimes people can't put what they believe into words. They don't really know what to say. I became very interested in apologetics back, 6, 7, 8 years ago when Biola University came to Christ Fellowship, and they did a weekend thing, and that really piqued my interest as far as apologetics is concerned. As a matter of fact, I was telling Paul, this semester is my first semester. I signed up and got accepted to Liberty University for the master's program in Christian apologetics. So I enjoy the topic very much. Now, the research paper part of it is kicking my butt, but I do enjoy the topic. So what are we going to talk about today? There's several things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, what is apologetics? And it's not apology. We'll get into that in just a second. The second thing is, why do we do apologetics? So that's another thing. It's one thing to know what it is. It's another thing to know, why do we do it? And then, who is our audience? Who is our audience? And we'll talk about that. And then we're going to actually talk about what types of questions and objections do people generally have. So we'll get some participation on that. And then I'm going to take one example of apologetics, and we're going to dive a little deeper into one thing because we don't have time to go into all of it. And then what we'll do is I'm going to teach you one tactic, and Gary knows what I'm talking about, and a couple other people, but on how to do apologetics. So that's going to be our topic for today. So first thing is, what is apologetics? Now, you all have a handout there, and I've written most of the stuff down. So there's only the occasional word that you have to fill in. So I left you blanks, and so you have to kind of follow along and write it in if you want to. So what is apologetics in general? Well, apologetics is the attempt to defend a particular belief or system of beliefs against objections. That's what apologetics is in general. Now, Christian apologetics is the attempt to defend the Christian worldview against objections. Now, apologetics has nothing to do with the word apology. It actually comes from the Greek word apologia, which actually means to speak away, or in defense of, to speak away. It was originally used in the legal term, in the legal context. And apologia was like what the defense attorney would do in defense of what the prosecution was trying to say. So that's where the word apologia comes from, and that's what the context it was used in. So why do we do apologetics? Well, as your notes say, the Bible tells us to. The Bible tells us so. So there's several verses in here that, and Michael, I'll read them to you so you'll know what they are. But they're in here, and they're in the Bible, and I just wrote them down for you so you'd have them for future reference. The first one is Matthew 28, 19, and 20. It says, "Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I commanded you." So there's in the Bible, it says they want us to go and they want us to teach. 1 Peter 3:15 is another good one. It says, "But in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared." Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that lies within you, but do this with gentleness and respect. And that's a key thing to apologetics too, because it's not like, well, how do I blast people who object to me? No, it's all about gentleness and respect. And then we have Jude 1:3. Jude 1:3, dear friends, although I was very eager to write to you about the salvation we share, I felt compelled to write and urge you to contend for the faith that was once for all entrusted to God's holy people. So that's Jude 1:3. 2 Timothy is another one. 2 Timothy 2:24-26. And the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but must be kind to everyone and able to teach, not resentful. Opponents must be gently instructed, in the hope that God will grant them the repentance leading them to a knowledge of the truth. So that's good on that one. The next one, Colossians 4:5-6. Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. And then the last one, Titus 1:9, says, he must hold firmly to the trustworthy message as it has been taught, so that he can encourage others by sound doctrine and refute those who oppose it. This was Paul writing to Titus about the qualities of an elder of the church, what qualities an elder should have. So those are just some Bible verses that say that, we really should be doing apologetics. I mean, the Bible tells us so. But who is our audience? Who is it that we should be doing apologetics with? Does anybody? I mean, we got some of them there. I think I wrote on here skeptics, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the objections that you might hear, but skeptics. But who are some of the other people that we should be doing apologetics to?
New believers.
Yes, believers is one. So believers. So you've got skeptics, believers, and then there's in the middle. Who's in the middle of skeptics and believers?
Agnostics.
Oh, okay. Well, they're okay, but I'm thinking seekers. The ones who are, they're not there yet, but they're seeking, and they have questions, and they have objections. They're not so much objections that they don't care what you say, they're not going to believe you, but they have questions. There's a difference between having reasons and causes, as Gary and I learned, and that is, reasons are when somebody just has questions and they're open to an answer. If somebody has causes why they're not believing, there's underlying things why they're not going to believe you no matter what you say. They might have psychological issues from the past, or issues, or they've been done wrong, and so they're just closed off and they're not going to believe. And if somebody has causes, you're not going to be able to get through to them until those causes have been cleared up. But if they just have reasons, if they just have questions, those are people that are open to hearing what you have to say. So let's talk about some examples of some of the questions and objections that people might have. I'll give you one. I was at lunch just the other day with a guy, and he's sort of on the fence. He's a seeker, I would think, although he probably won't admit it, but I could tell that he is. And we were talking about the Bible, and then I heard this comment. Well, the Bible is, a bunch of stories. And, by the way, and everything that's in it was written in the New Testament like hundreds of years after Jesus died. So, how accurate could it really be? And of course, I went, really? Threw a couple tactics at him, which we'll talk about. But anyway, so that's one thing that I've heard. So what are some of the other objections that you might hear to the Christian faith that you hear out there in conversation with people? Yeah.
God is so great. Why is there evil in the world?
Why is there evil and suffering in the world? Right.
Why he's here.
Right. Okay, Michael?
Men wrote the Bible, so what could they know?
Right.
They didn't know about inspiration of the Holy Spirit.
Right, just a bunch of men, right? Just a bunch of men. What are some other ones?
There's contradictions in the Bible.
Contradictions in the Bible, right?
How could God expect everyone in the world to believe in Jesus?
Okay, these are the kind of, and you know what, here's some other ones, and I have the pain and suffering one in here, and here's it, an all good God would want to eliminate evil, an all powerful God would would be able to eliminate evil, so he's either not able or he doesn't want to. Those are kind of what you hear out there, right? Here's another one. People don't come back to life after they die. It just doesn't happen. Science has proven that, right? I mean, that's what you hear.
It's the end.
Bible's just a bunch of stories. The Bible's been translated so many times, who knows what the heck it originally said anyway, right? Or there's been so many copies of the Bible, copy after copy after copy, and that's like the telephone game, which, by the way, I also heard recently. You know, you tell somebody one thing, goes around the room, by the time it gets over here, it's totally different, you know, and it's like you hear that. So here's the thing. I would hear these things, and before I even started doing apologetics, the answer that came out of my mouth when they would say this was this. It was very intelligent. It was, because I didn't know what to say, right? I didn't have any answer. I go like, oh man, I'm not prepared. So that's what got my interest when Biola came in, began to learn this stuff. And I'm still a long way from being like Rabbi Zacharias and be able to just come out with the answer. But the point is, it's all about progress, not perfection, right? None of us are perfect. So those are just some of the, let's see if I have any others on here that I want to do. I don't believe the Bible is the inspired word of God. Why should we believe what the New Testament authors wrote? After all, the New Testament was written over 100 years after the death of Christ. So really, after all, like common knowledge. Any others? Any other objections? Yeah.
How do you know, well, after years have passed, how do you know specifically what Jesus actually said?
Yeah.
When there is nobody dictating it to him.
Yeah.
And I thought about that before. It's somewhere in Acts it said that you may not know, and Jesus said, you may not know exactly what I said, but the Holy Spirit, when he comes, will tell you exactly what I said like 10 or 15 years ago.
Right.
The words in the Bible that said this is what Jesus said, that's not those people talking, it's the Holy Spirit working through this. So those words are exactly what Jesus said.
How many of you remember more about what happened 30 years ago than you do what happened yesterday? Right? That's me. So we're going to take one example. We're going to take one example of an apologetic type question, and we're going to dive a little deeper into that. So here's the question: eyewitness testimony of the Gospels. Now we all know that the Gospels these are eyewitnesses, right? These are people that were with Jesus and they were there, right? They were there. But people dispute that. Skeptics go, no, they don't believe that. They don't believe in the eyewitness testimony because they don't think of it as eyewitness testimony.
Womb theory.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's plenty of theories. There's several theories about Jesus didn't die. The Muslims don't believe he actually died at all. Others, they stole the body. Then there's the twin. Jesus had a twin. I don't know if you heard about that one. Jesus had a twin brother, and so that's what that was all about. But we're going to take one, and we're going to go with the eyewitness testimony. So what I do is I talk to people, and I say, look, I would like you to just think of the Bible for the moment. Forget about it being the inspired word of God for the moment. Remember, I'm dealing with a skeptic here, right? So let's just treat it like a historical document. Just for the moment. Let's just treat it like a historical document. So, and they go, all right, we'll treat it like a historical document. And I said, let's just take some things in history. Now, I wrote some things down there on paper, and Michael, I'll say it out loud so you'll know what I'm saying. But I got some newspaper articles here, and I just want to go through them with you. So here's one. In history, there's a historical document. It says President Trump, Donald J. Trump, elected president. Now, how many of you believe that actually happened? Raise your hand. Well, why do you believe that?
That's fake news.
Yeah, well, maybe. All right, but even if this piece of paper, why do you believe that?
Eyewitnesses.
It just happened. Just when? Just last year, right? A year ago. Of course you're going to remember that. I was there, right? Here's one. Obama being elected president. This is his first term. So now that was what? 2008, November 2008. Now that was now what? 8 or 9 years ago. How many believe it? We all believe it, right? Why? Because we were there. So, okay, that's the second one. Here's one. Let's go back to this is actually 2009. Michael Jackson dying. Now, we all know who Michael Jackson was. We all know that he died. There's some things in history that we all know because we were there. But there's also certain things in history that we remember where we were and what we were doing when that happened. Now, I don't remember where I was when Michael Jackson died. I do know that he died. We all know that he died, but I don't remember, what I was doing. But I'm sure we all remember this one, the 2001 9/11, right? Raise your hand if you know what you were doing, how you heard it, right? Everybody. Now that was how long ago? 2001. How many years ago? 16 years ago. But we remember everything about that day from our perspective, right? So we remember. There's no disputing that. Let's go back a little farther. The home of the hanging Chad. The Bush election, 2000. You know, when I'm telling people where I'm from and stuff, and I go, yeah, I'm from South Florida, Palm Beach County, and they're going, I go, the home of the hanging Chad. And they go, oh, they all know what that is, if they're old enough, right? Well, that was the year 2000, right? So that was 17, almost 18 years ago. We remember that. Okay, here's one from 1999. JFK Jr., lost at sea. Remember that one? Yeah. So that was 1999. We remember that. Here's one, 1997. Princess Diana gets killed. We all remember that, right? We remember that. Here's one going back to 1995. O.J. Freed. By the way, why the heck do I have all these? I used to be a history teacher. I like saving stuff like this. But O.J. Freed. Here's a front page. Now this is 19. Now we're almost 20 years, right? Almost 20 years ago. By the way, speaking of which, historians, most scholars, most biblical scholars will say that most of the New Testament was written no more than 40 years after Christ died. No more than, and some of them as early as 5 years after. So now we're already beyond that. Here's one. I'm sure everybody remembers where they were when this happened. Shuttle explosion, 1986. This is a Fort Pierce paper because I was living up that way when it happened, and I remember seeing the Y in the sky. Everybody remember seeing that? Yeah. Okay, that was how long ago? 1985? 1986. How long ago was that? 20, but we have a pretty vivid, we remember, right? So now this is where people go, oh, it's so long ago, so far after, there's no way they could remember all this stuff. No, if it's something that's dramatic, we remember where we were. We remember a lot of things about that.
November 22nd, 1963.
Well, I'm not there yet. Give me a chance. Here we go. I got two more newspapers.
Okay.
July 20th, 1969. Man walks on the moon. I remember where I was in 1960 when this happened. I was watching TV. Were you? How many? Raise your hand. Are you watching TV when this happened? Most of us were. We remember. They say, "Oh, come on." There's no. Yeah.
School teacher rolled the TV.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah. Yeah. So people say, "Wait a minute. That's 1970. How many years is that? 30, 40. How many years ago is that?" Somebody do the math. How many? 48 years ago. 48 years ago. But every one of us in the room that was around, we all remember that. Okay? Now remember, I'm trying to get in the head of this skeptic. Treat this like a historical document, right? So I'm getting there. Here's one. And then again, this is November 23rd of 63. This nation walks last sad steps. It's about Kennedy assassination. Okay, 1963. I was in 4th grade, and I remember the teacher, he didn't pull out a big screen TV back then, but he told us about it. And then I think school was let out early, and off we went. So now that takes me back to 1969. Let's go back farther. Here. Oh, sorry, 63, sorry. Eli Wiesel, he wrote a book called Night. He was a Holocaust survivor. And he wrote this book in 1958, but I just want to read one thing. Like, why did he write this? Why did he write this book after the Holocaust? He wrote, "Was it to leave behind a legacy of words, of memories, to help prevent history from repeating itself? Or was it simply to preserve a record of the ordeal I endured as an adolescent, at an age when no one's knowledge of death and evil should be limited to what one discovers in literature? In retrospect, I must confess I don't know, or the longer I know what I wanted to achieve with my words. I only know that without this testimony, my life would not have become what it is." So, do we have any reason to doubt what's in here? Here's a Holocaust survivor writing about the Holocaust that he experienced. Is there any reason at all why we wouldn't believe his eyewitness testimony? None. Here's a book I got. Underground Railroad, written by William Still. William Still, his parents were slaves, and this is all stories about people who escaped through the Underground Railroad. And then he wrote, and here began revelations connected with this marvelous coincidence, which influenced me for years previous to emancipation to preserve the matter found in the pages of this humble volume. So in other words, look, I think he thought it was important that he wrote this stuff down. So that's 1850s was when the experience was. He wrote it in like 1878. Going back further, in the 1700s, here's a guy that was a slave, and then he was freed. A life of Olaudah Equiano, written in the 1700s, and then he just wrote. Let's see. Well, anyway, in here he explained. I'm just trying to find it. As to why he wrote it. He wrote it because he wanted everybody to know what life in the 1700s was like as a slave in the slave trade in America.
You worked for Wilberforce.
Yes, he did.
Eliminate the slave trade.
Yes, he did. Thank you. That's right. Let's go back even farther, and we're almost done with these examples. Josephus, the Jewish Wars. Now, Josephus was born in 37 AD, and so he wrote this is like just after Jesus was died. Now, he didn't talk about Jesus in this volume, but why did he write this? He wrote it, he said, I shall state the facts accurately and impartially. He says he wrote this for the benefit of the emperor's subjects. He decided to translate into Greek the books which he wrote some time ago. So he wrote it in Hebrew, he's a Jew, and then he translated it into Greek, and that's what this was. This is in English. All right, I have one more from the book of Luke, right? Luke, chapter 1. Insomuch as many have taken in hand to set in order a narrative of those things which have been fulfilled among us, just as those from whom the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word delivered to them, it seemed good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write to you an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of those things which you are instructed. I mean, that's the same thing as these, right? This is somebody right now. I remember I'm talking to a skeptic. I'm saying, look, from a historical standpoint, why would you doubt what Luke wrote and not doubt this? There's no reason why you would doubt that, because if you're going to doubt this, then you have to doubt all this.
That's right.
You can't say no to this and yes to this from a historical point of view. So then if you can get them realizing from a historical point of view that this is an accurate document, then they start reading it, and then they start seeing more than just the historical part of that. So hopefully that's a good example for you as to how you can just take that one thing and dive deep. Now, you're not going to have all these things on hand. And by the way, I've got pictures of all these front pages in a document that I can send anybody that wants to use it. I'll be happy to send it to you so you'll have it to spread and share with people. So the other thing that I want to talk to you about is one tactic. There's a book out there which some of you have read, and Gary has a small group going. Who else has a small group going?
Same one.
Okay, all in the same group. Well, Gary was in my small group, and we went through this book, and he liked it so much he started a group and doing it. But this is a book called Tactics, and I'm going to add this to your library so you'll have it here. And it's all about how to do apologetics. And again, in here he's talking about doing it with gentleness and respect and doing it in a nice way. But he's got several tactics in that book, which are all good. But the one basic one that I want to talk to you about is called the Columbo approach. And I think that's one of your... and you all remember Columbo, right? You remember the show? Remember what he used to do? Yeah. And he'd ask a question, and then he'd go to walk away and go, one more question. Just got one more question. One more question for you. And then he'd ask that one question and maybe come back, one more, just one more. And that was his approach. Well, that's kind of what Greg Kokel is saying, is like, you just do it with questions. So here's the tactic. And it's the first thing is you ask somebody when they throw one of those objections out to you, is you ask them, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? Because if you ask them what do they mean by that, a lot of times they don't know. They just heard it, so they're just throwing it out there to kind of throw you off your game so that you'll just change the subject. So, well, the Bible, there's written over 100 years after Jesus died. Well, what do you mean by that? well, and then they'll try to defend, because what you're doing is you're throwing the burden of proof back on them. No, I don't have to defend my position. Basically, by saying, what do you mean by that? You're lobbing it right back to them so that they have to defend their position. So now, question.
God's always put Jehovah's Witnesses in front of me, or I've walked up to them, and I've been angry about it, going it the wrong way.
Yeah.
And the Spirit had me have them explain to me what they believe in.
Yeah.
Reverse the role.
Yeah.
And then I at whatever moment, then I go at it. But I do it in a good way.
Well, and that's the first part of this tactic, is asking them questions. So what do you mean by that? You're getting the what first. And then after you get the what, so they tell you what they mean by that, and then you say, how did you come to that conclusion? Well, the Bible's been written over 100 years. What do you mean by that? They tell you whatever they're going to tell you, and then you say, well, so I'm just one more question. One more Columbo approach. How did you come to that conclusion? And most of the time, it's like, well, I've done a deep study in this particular topic, and I have several scholarly peer-reviewed articles that I referred to. They're not going to tell you that. They're going to go, I heard it on the History Channel, or my brother told me, or they're going to come up with something. So it's, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Which usually they have nothing. And then you can throw out and just say, have you ever considered, or just consider this. And then just run through, and then you can give them your angle from that. And then that way, you're doing it in a gentle way, a conversational way, and you're not blasting them, no, you're wrong, let me tell you why you're wrong. It's, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? And there are a lot of other tactics that are in here. Again, I'll leave it up in the library for anybody that wants to read it. So this is a topic that just excited me. I'm still not where I want to be. I still get, and by the way, here's one other thing. It's okay to say, that's a great question. If they ask you a question and you don't have an answer, it's okay to say, that's a great question. Can I get back to you on that? There's nothing wrong with that. And then you do some research, and then you reintroduce that topic and that question back to them. So in conclusion, I just want to repeat what 1 Peter said, 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. That's it. Thank you. Did I take up too much time?
No, that was excellent.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions?